Shaq wants to feel like the old Shaquille again, before he had $400 million. At 6 p.m., he walks into the Big Slice, his own diner, through the back door for the first time. He only wants a spicy chicken sandwich to remember his mother. But a loud fight at the cash register stops him cold. Toby and Chloe are counting coins, $17. 42, exactly $5 short for their grandma's medicine. The manager stands there, with a stopwatch, and cuts their pay for personal business. It is a clear battle between cold rules and human respect. Shaq steps back and starts an undercover mission to fix this mess. He finds tricky contracts and small bosses who abuse their power. Will he stay quiet, or will he use his giant strength to make things right? The alley behind the Big Slice smelled like old grease and wet cardboard. A yellow bulb buzzed over the back door. It flickered every few seconds, like it wanted to give up. Shaquille O'Neal stood in the shadow of the dumpster, and even the dumpster looked small next to him. He was 7 feet 1 inch tall. His shoulders almost touched both sides of the narrow walkway. He had learned a long time ago to duck his head under low door frames, even when nobody was watching. He wore a gray hoodie with a broken zipper. He wore old jeans with a small tear near the knee. His shoes were plain black sneakers, size 23, the only part of him he could never hide. He kept his head down, and his shoulders curled forward, the way he always did in tight spaces. He was not trying to look small. He was trying not to make anyone else feel small. He came here 2 or 3 times a year, always alone, always through the back door. The Big Slice was one of 40 diners, with his name stamped on the sign. Most nights he never thought about any of them. Tonight felt different. Tonight he wanted a taste of home, not a business report. He wanted the spicy chicken sandwich his mother used to make on Sunday nights in Newark, back when money was thin and love was thick. Lucille never had much, but she always found a way to make a plate feel like a hug. He had chased that same feeling in restaurants across the country for years. He rarely found it. Something told him tonight might be different. A delivery truck rumbled past the mouth of the alley, headlights sweeping briefly across the brick wall. Shaq pressed himself into the shadow until it passed. Old habits. He had spent 30 years learning how to disappear inside a room built for smaller people. Door frames, airplane seats, booth tables with metal legs bolted too close together. He had learned to fold himself down, joint by joint, until he took up just enough space to get by, without knocking something over. Through a gap in the kitchen door, he watched a boy kneel by a stack of empty crates. The boy was maybe 19 years old. His eyes had dark circles under them, the kind that come from too many nights without enough sleep. His name was Toby Reyes, though Shaq did not know that yet. Toby held one sneaker in his lap. The sole had come loose at the toe. He wrapped a strip of black electrical tape around it, slow and careful, like he was bandaging a wound. Shaq watched the tape go around twice, then 3 times. He thought about his own shoes, the ones on his feet right now, worth more than most people's rent. He did not think about the money. He thought about a boy in Newark, New Jersey, 30 years ago, wrapping tape around a shoe just like this one. That boy had been him. He almost stepped forward. Then a woman's voice rang out from the front of the diner, sharp and shaking. Shaq stopped and pressed closer to the door. I already told him, the voice said. I already explained everything. A young woman stood at the register. Her name was Chloe Bennett. She had flour on her apron and sweat on her forehead, even though the kitchen fans were running full blast. In her hand, she held a small stack of coins and crumpled bills. She counted them again, her lips moving without sound. Toby dropped his sneaker and hurried over. He stood beside her and looked down at the register drawer like it might change its mind. How much do we have? He asked. $17.42, Chloe said. Her voice cracked on the word 42. We need $22.50 for Grandma's prescription. The pharmacy closes at 7. A tall, thin man walked up behind them. He wore a crisp white shirt and a name tag that said Julian Thorne, shift manager. He held a silver stopwatch in one hand. He clicked the button with his thumb over and over. It looked like a nervous habit that had turned into a weapon. He tapped a ruler against the computer screen, right where the clock out time glowed in green letters. You're 4 minutes over your break, Julian said. Both of you. Julian, please, Chloe said. My grandmother needs this medicine tonight. Her heart pills. I just need $5. Rules don't care about hearts, Chloe. Julian's voice stayed calm and cold, like a man reading a grocery list. I don't care if your grandmother is sick or not. Rules are rules. Toby's jaw tightened. She helped raise me too. Chloe worked through her lunch yesterday, and you never paid her for it. That's not documented, Julian said. If it's not on the sheet, it didn't happen. Behind the kitchen door, Shaq felt his right hand curl into a fist. He looked down at it and slowly opened his fingers again. His heart pounded, but his feet did not move. Not yet. He thought about the numbers glowing on that screen. $17.42. A prescription bill for $22.50, sitting folded on the counter like a small piece of bad news. He understood something in that moment, clear as a bell. This was not one manager having a bad night. This was a system, and somehow, he had let it grow inside his own restaurant, without ever checking on it. He almost walked out right then, almost pulled $5,000 from his wallet and dropped it on the counter and left before anyone could ask his name. His hand actually reached toward his back pocket. Then he stopped himself. If he did that, Julian would still be standing there tomorrow, with his stopwatch and his ruler. The next kid, with a sick grandmother, would face the exact same wall. Throwing money at one bad night would not fix a broken system. He needed to see how deep this went. He needed to walk in, as nobody, not as Shaquille O'Neal, owner of 100 businesses. An old memory rose up in his mind, steady as a heartbeat. His father, Sergeant Philip Harrison, standing on a cracked Newark sidewalk in 1980. Young Shaquille had been staring at his shoes, embarrassed by a man pushing a cart of cans and bottles. His father had gripped his shoulder, hard enough to make him look up. Look him in the eye, and say good morning, his father had said. A man with nothing still deserves your eyes on his face. Shaq had said good morning that day. The man with the cart had smiled like it was the first kind word he'd heard in weeks. His mother, Lucille, used to say almost the same thing at their kitchen table in Newark. She would tell him that a full stomach meant nothing if your heart stayed empty. She said it while stretching one pot of beans to feed 4 hungry kids. His father's voice came back to him now, clear across 3 decades. Real power isn't in your wallet, son. It's in how you protect people who have nothing. Shaq remembered the cracked sidewalk under his father's boots and the smell of exhaust from passing buses that hot summer morning. He remembered how small he felt back then, even before he grew taller than every teacher at his school. His father never once let him look away from someone struggling. That lesson had outlasted every trophy Shaq ever earned. Shaq breathed out slowly. He looked down at his hoodie, his torn jeans, his plain sneakers. Nobody in this diner had any reason to know who he was. That was exactly the point. He pulled the hood up over his head and slid on a pair of thin, fake reading glasses from his front pocket. He straightened his back just enough to look tired instead of towering. Then he pushed the swinging door and stepped into the dining room like any other hungry man walking in after a long shift. The bell above the front door jingled as he crossed toward the counter, even though he'd come from the kitchen side. Chloe looked up first. Her eyes were red, but she forced a small smile onto her face anyway. That was the kind of thing tired workers learn to do. "Welcome to the Big Slice," she said. "What can I get you?" "Spicy chicken sandwich," Shaq said, keeping his voice low and rough. "And a water, please." "Coming right up," Chloe said. Toby moved to the grill without a word. He cracked the sandwich open and added extra pickles without being asked. The grill hissed and popped as he laid down fresh chicken. When Julian's back was turned, he slipped one more piece of spicy chicken onto the bun, just a little more than the recipe called for. He caught Shaq's eye for half a second and nodded like he was sharing a secret. "You looked hungry," Toby said quietly, sliding the plate across the counter. "Figured you could use a little extra tonight." Shaq stared down at that sandwich for a long moment. A stranger, exhausted and worried about his own grandmother, had still found room to be kind to someone he'd never met. It hit him harder than he expected. He nodded once and mumbled a thank you. The diner smelled like fry oil and warm bread. A ceiling fan spun slow overhead, barely stirring the air. Booth seats were patched, with silver duct tape in 3 different spots. A jukebox sat quiet in the corner, unplugged, probably broken for months. None of it looked fancy. It looked like a place where tired people came to feel normal for 20 minutes. That was exactly what Shaq had wanted when he opened the first Big Slice years ago. Somewhere along the way, a man with a stopwatch had turned it into something colder. An older customer at the next booth caught Shaq's eye and gave a small, tired nod, the kind strangers share in diners late at night. Shaq nodded back. He noticed the man counting nickels from a small plastic bag, laying them out one at a time next to his coffee cup. Nobody in this room seemed to have much extra. That fact settled over him like a second, heavier coat. Julian noticed the extra chicken almost instantly. His eyes narrowed at the register receipt, then at the tray. "Chloe, did you authorize extra portions for this customer?" He looked hungry, Julian. "It's 4 ounces of chicken. It's nothing." "It's inventory theft," Julian said. He pulled a clipboard from behind the counter and flipped to a page already full of small check marks and dollar signs. "That's a $50 write-up. Sign here." $50? For one piece of chicken worth maybe $2? Company policy triples any unauthorized giveaway as a deterrent, Julian said. He tapped his pen against the clipboard. "Sign it, or I write you up for insubordination instead. That's worse." Chloe's hand shook as she signed her name. Shaq watched from his booth, chewing slowly, feeling that sandwich turn to sawdust in his mouth. He clenched his jaw and kept his eyes down on his plate. A moment later, Julian turned toward him, looking him up and down with open disdain. He seemed to enjoy having someone new to needle. "You gonna finish that, big guy, or just stare at it all night?" Julian said, smirking. "Big man like you, no offense. But big and broke just means more mouth to feed, and less in the wallet." The words landed like small stones. They felt harmless on their own, but sharp all the same. Shaq had heard worse 1,000 times over. That was back before anyone knew his name. Boys on the newer courts used to say worse things to him, back when he was awkward and growing too fast for his own clothes. He kept his face calm now. He picked up the sandwich and took another bite. He chewed slow and said nothing. Silence, he reminded himself, was its own kind of strength. Reacting would only prove Julian right about something. Staying quiet proved nothing but patience. When he finished eating, he asked where the restroom was. Chloe pointed toward a narrow hallway near the back office. Shaq thanked her and walked that way, but he did not stop at the restroom door. He kept walking, past a mop closet, until he reached a small office with a half-open door and a desk lamp still glowing. He slipped inside and eased the door shut behind him. A metal filing cabinet stood against the wall, one drawer slightly open. Inside, folders were labeled in Julian's tight, slanted handwriting. Shaq flipped through them fast, his heart hammering against his ribs. One folder made him stop cold. It was labeled deductions, and it was thick, far thicker than it should have been for a diner this size. Inside were pages of tiny fines. $1 late clock-ins cost workers $10 each. Phone use during shift cost $20. A stained apron cost $15, deducted straight from a paycheck without warning. Page after page of small, cruel arithmetic. At the bottom of the folder, a single handwritten total stopped his breath entirely. $12,000 for $115, collected from these fake fines, over 3 months, moved into a separate account under Julian's own name. Not a policy, not a company rule, a private scheme, dressed up to look official. Shaq's hands felt heavy as he flipped back through the pages one more time. Each fine had a name attached to it. He recognized 2 of them already. Toby Reyes, docked $30 for a late clock-in during a week his bus broke down twice. Chloe Bennett, docked $15 for a coffee stain on her apron. That wasn't even her fault. Somebody had spilled it on her during a rush. She never got the chance to explain. He thought about all the nights these two had gone home, with less money than they earned, never knowing exactly why their checks kept shrinking. A quiet anger built inside his chest, steady and controlled. Not the kind of anger that makes a man yell. The kind that makes him careful, patient, and absolutely certain about what has to happen next. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Shaq barely had time to slide the folder back into place before the door swung open. Julian stood in the frame, eyes wide with fury. "What exactly are you doing in my office?" "Wrong door," Shaq said, keeping his voice low and rough. looking for the restroom. That's not the restroom, and you know it. Julian stepped back and shouted down the hall. Marcus, get in here. Two security guards jogged in from the front entrance. Both were broad-shouldered. Both were clearly used to being the biggest men in any room they entered. That changed the moment they saw Shaq standing there. He filled most of the doorway on his own. One guard's eyes flicked upward, taking in just how tall this stranger really was. His partner slowed his steps, unsure now. Neither of them moved any closer at first. Get him out of here, Julian barked. He's trespassing in a restricted area. The first guard grabbed for Shaq's arm. Shaq did not pull away and did not push back. He simply stood there, solid as a wall, while the guard's grip slid uselessly off his sleeve. The second guard shoved a hand against his chest, trying to move him toward the door. Shaq's feet stayed planted, but his face stayed calm, almost bored. You think you can just wander around a business like this and not get caught? Julian sneered. He stepped closer now, that his men stood between them. People like you always think the rules don't apply. Newsflash. They do. Shaq said nothing. He let the words bounce off him. Inside his mind, though, something was shifting, quiet and permanent. This was the part where the old Shaquille needed to step aside completely. The superstar, the man with the highlight reels and the championship rings. In his place stood someone else now. Someone who remembered exactly what it felt like to be shoved. Men like these always thought size made you a threat. They never stopped to think size might just mean a person trying to help. He noticed, almost without meaning to, a small security camera mounted in the corner of the hallway. Its red light blinked steady. Good, he thought. Let it record everything. Let it catch every word Julian was saying right now. He was saying it out loud, in his own restaurant, to a customer who had done nothing but asked the wrong door. I'll leave, Shaq said quietly. No trouble. He turned and walked out past the guards. He walked past Julian's glare, back into the dining room. Chloe and Toby stood frozen near the register there. They watched the whole scene unfold, with wide, worried eyes. He sat back down at his booth like nothing had happened. A few minutes later, he saw Chloe wiping down a table near the front window. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked. A small crumb of dried sauce sat on the floor tile near her feet. It was left over from an earlier rush, easy to miss in the dim light. Julian came storming out of the hallway and spotted it instantly. That's a health code violation, Julian snapped. You're supposed to be watching the floor, not the customers. Julian, it's one spot. I'll get it right now. You're written up. Third one this month. One more, and you're done here. He turned toward Toby next, jabbing a finger at him. And you let a customer sneak into the back hallway on your watch. That's on you too. Shaq stood up from his booth. He walked toward the counter, slow and deliberate, his shadow stretching long across the tile floor. It wasn't their fault, Shaq said, still using his rough, disguised voice. I walked back there myself. Nobody let me do anything. And who exactly are you to speak up for my staff? Julian asked. He turned to face him, with a thin, mocking smile. Just a customer, Shaq said. One who saw the whole thing. Julian rolled his eyes and waved a dismissive hand. He backed off from writing up Chloe on the spot. He muttered something about finishing the conversation later. Toby caught Shaq's eye across the counter. He gave him a small, grateful nod. Something had shifted between them, even if nobody said it out loud. Trust, quiet and real, had started to grow between two strangers. A phone rang in the back office a short while later. Shaq lingered near the hallway, pretending to study a faded menu on the wall, and listened as Julian's voice carried through the thin door. Yeah, it's me, Julian said, his tone suddenly bright and eager. Numbers are great this month. I cut labor costs almost 18%. Cut the health insurance stipend for part-timers, tightened up the break policy. Regional's gonna love these margins. Shaq's stomach turned cold. Julian was not some rogue employee acting alone in the shadows. He was reporting these numbers upward to someone above him, someone who apparently rewarded this kind of cruelty as smart business. The rot went further than one manager with a stopwatch. It reached into the company Shaq himself had built, layer after layer, and he had never once looked closely enough to see it. He thought about all the other big slice locations across the country. Somewhere out there were more Tobas and Chloes he had never met. They worked shifts under managers just like Julian. They trusted a company with his own name on the door. The weight of that realization settled onto his shoulders like a heavy coat. He had spent years signing off on reports without reading every line. He had trusted regional numbers without asking who paid the real cost for them. He needed more than one folder of fake finds now. He needed proof of the phone calls. He needed proof that this went up the chain. That proof had to be strong enough that nobody could wave it away as one bad manager on one bad night. He thought back to the last time he had visited a big slice location. As himself, cameras flashing, staff lined up smiling for photos. Nobody in that lineup had mentioned a stopwatch. Nobody had mentioned fake fines or fake fees. Of course they hadn't. People smile for the boss. They save the truth for nights when the boss isn't watching. That was the real lesson tonight was teaching him. If he wanted the truth, he had to stand where nobody expected him to stand, dressed like nobody worth noticing. He pulled a small notepad from his hoodie pocket, the kind he always carried out of old habit. He wrote down 3 names from the folder in careful block letters. Julian Thorne, the regional director on the phone call, and a third name scrawled at the bottom of a memo, someone higher up who had approved a bonus tied directly to labor cost cuts. 3 names. 3 people who needed to answer for tonight, not just one. The dinner rush faded into a quieter evening crowd. Around 8:15, Toby walked past the front counter carrying a small cardboard box. Inside sat a jacket, a pair of gloves, and a framed photo. The photo showed an older woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Julian intercepted him near the door and blocked his path with one arm. "Where do you think you're going with company property?" Julian asked. "This box is mine, Julian. It's just my stuff from the break room shelf." "You still owe $140 for your training materials fee," Julian said. "Until that's paid, everything in this building counts as collateral. That box included." "That's not even a real policy," Toby said. His voice rose for the first time all night. "Nobody signed anything about a training fee." "Check your onboarding packet again," Julian said coldly. Page 11, small print. "I wrote it myself." Toby's shoulders sagged. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that goes past your body and settles into your spirit. He set the box down slowly, like he was giving up on it, giving up on tonight, maybe giving up on more than that. Shaq had seen enough. He stood up from his booth and walked toward the counter, unhurried, each step deliberate. He reached up with both hands and slowly pulled back his hood. He slid the fake glasses off his face and folded them, tucking them into his pocket. The dining room went quiet. A few customers near the window turned to look. Julian's eyes moved up and up and up again. He tracked the sheer height of the man standing before him. Recognition dawned slow, then all at once, like a light switching on in a dark room. "You're," Julian's voice faltered. "You're Shaquille O'Neal," Shaq said, calm and even, no anger in his voice at all, just quiet, absolute certainty. "This is my restaurant." Nobody screamed. Nobody gasped dramatically. The silence itself did all the work, heavy and complete, pressing down on the room like a held breath. Julian's face drained of color. His stopwatch slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the tile floor, the sound sharp and small in the stillness. "I want you to hear something," Shaq said, still calm. $17.42. That's what was in Chloe's pocket tonight, $5 short of her grandmother's heart medicine. $12,415. That's what you collected from fake fines over 3 months, sitting in your own private account. $140 for a training fee nobody ever agreed to. I read every page in that folder, Julian. Julian opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked toward the security guards, but they had already stepped back, unwilling to put a hand on their boss now. "I heard your phone call too," Shaq continued, bragging to regional about cutting insurance and tightening brakes. "You called it optimizing profit. I call it stealing from people who trusted you to treat them fair." "Mr. O'Neal, I can explain." "You don't need to explain to me," Shaq said. "You need to explain to them." He turned toward Chloe and Toby, who stood frozen behind the counter, eyes wide with disbelief. "And to whoever hired you thinking numbers matter more than people. Julian's legs seemed to give out slightly. He sank against the counter, his face pale, his hands trembling at his sides. There was no shouting, no argument, no attempt to fight back. Just a slow, quiet collapse, exactly the kind Shaq had learned to expect from people who built their power on fear instead of respect. When the truth finally caught up to them, they had nothing left to stand on. A few customers near the window had pulled out their phones, recording quietly, though nobody shouted or made a scene of it. One young mother pulled her son a little closer and whispered something in his ear. Whatever she said made him watch Shaq with wide, curious eyes instead of fear. Chloe reached over and took Toby's hand without thinking about it. Neither of them let go for a long moment. They had spent months feeling invisible in this building. Tonight, for the first time, somebody with real power had chosen to see them clearly. 2 police officers arrived, within the hour, called by the district manager, after Shaq placed one calm phone call laying out every detail. Julian was walked out, through the front door in handcuffs. He passed the same tables, where he had once cracked down on 4 minutes, over a break. Nobody in the diner cheered. Nobody needed to. The quiet on his way out said everything that needed saying. Outside, red and blue lights washed across the front window in slow, silent waves. A few customers stood near the glass, watching without a word. Chloe wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. Then she went right back to stacking clean plates. That was simply what she knew how to do, with her hands, when her heart felt too full for talking. Shaq did not write a check and disappear into the night. He stayed. He walked behind the counter himself. An apron hung loosely around his enormous frame, the strings barely reaching around his waist. He began making sandwiches alongside Toby and Chloe. He worked like any other employee finishing out a long shift, elbow to elbow, with 2 people he had known for less than 2 hours. "Grandma's medicine," Chloe said suddenly, her eyes filling with tears. "The pharmacy closes at 7. It's already past 8. "Give me the address," Shaq said. "I'll call ahead. They'll stay open for us tonight." He made one more phone call. 20 minutes later, a delivery driver arrived at the diner. He carried a small white paper bag. Inside sat the heart medicine, paid in full, no fanfare attached to it. Chloe held the bag against her chest. She cried without trying to hide it anymore. Nobody in that room thought less of her for it. Toby wrapped an arm around her shoulder and let her lean on him for a moment. Later that night, the last customers went home. The closed sign hung crooked in the window. Shaq gathered Toby, Chloe, and the rest of the small evening crew around one long table. He explained, in plain and simple words, exactly what would happen next. Every one of Julian's fake fines would be refunded. He promised dollar for dollar, with interest added on top. Every employee across every Big Slice location would get a full review of their pay records. That review would go back 1 full year, no exceptions. An older cook named Marisol, who had worked the late shift for 6 years, raised her hand like she was back in school. "What about the training fee thing? A bunch of us paid that when we got hired. Nobody ever questioned it, because we needed the job too bad. That gets refunded too," Shaq said. "Every dollar." He paused for a moment. "I'll have someone from my office call each of you this week with the exact number." Marisol pressed a hand to her chest and looked away, blinking fast. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Toby reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently, the same way she must have done for him on harder nights. A young dishwasher near the back, barely out of high school, raised his hand next. "Is the diner staying open?" "Some of us were scared it might just close after all this." "It's staying open," Shaq said. "It's staying open, and it's staying honest. Those 2 things go together from now on." He looked around the table at every tired, hopeful face. "You'll see new managers here by next week. People I trust. People who remember what it feels like to count coins on a counter." The young dishwasher nodded, and finally let his shoulders relax. He had been standing stiff by the sink all night, waiting to hear if his job would even exist tomorrow. Now he grabbed a rag and went back to wiping down the counter. He hummed something soft under his breath. It was the first easy sound the kitchen had heard in hours. "I'm starting something new," Shaq said. "It's called the Harrison Fund. I named it after my father." He paused, looking around the small table. "It covers medical bills and school costs for anyone working here. No questions asked. No stopwatch involved. Toby stared at him, still trying to process the entire night. Why us? Why tonight? Because I used to be the kid with the taped-up shoe, Shaq said. Somebody looked me in the eye once. He told me that mattered more than money ever could. I never forgot it. He glanced down at Toby's old sneaker, still sitting near the crates by the kitchen door. I saw you fixing yours earlier. Took me right back. He pulled a small wooden stool from behind the counter and sat down. His knees rose almost to his chin. He looked every bit as out of place on that stool as he always had in tight spaces. Toby handed him a fresh, spicy chicken sandwich. It came with extra pickles and extra chicken, no write-up required this time. Shaq took a bite and smiled. It was a real smile, the first one all night. Chloe sat down across from him, still holding the small paper bag with her grandmother's pills inside it. Thank you, she said quietly, for seeing us. Everybody deserves to be seen, Shaq said, especially on the nights nobody's looking. Toby leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. It was the kind of breath that comes after holding fear in your chest for too many hours. He looked down at his own taped-up sneaker, still sitting by the crates near the kitchen door. Tomorrow he would buy a new pair. Tonight he decided to keep the old ones a little while longer. They would remind him how far one strange night could carry a person. Outside, the yellow bulb over the back door kept flickering, same as always. It cast its uneven light across the alley. A giant man in a torn hoodie had once stood quietly in those shadows, watching, waiting. He had chosen the harder path instead of the easy one. Inside, 3 people sat together at a small table. They ate sandwiches and said very little. They needed even less than that. The diner stayed open a little longer that night. It wasn't because the schedule required it. For the first time in a long while, nobody wanted to leave.